Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, I have a conversation with Reverend David Snodgrass, lead pastor at HopePointe Church of the Nazarene in Greenville, South Carolina. David Dean Snodgrass, if I read that correctly. So I heard that's what your family calls you, David Dean. So Reverend David Dean Snodgrass, pastor at HopePointe Church of the Nazarene in Greenville, South Carolina, previously known as Greenville First. And before that, you were at Camden.
That's correct.
Camden? Is it? Okay, yeah, Camden. And then before that, you kind of served bivocationally. It looked like you were at Columbia doing some youth ministry. My first sermon I heard you preach you're the first Nazarene. Well, I guess I met maybe a Nazarene right before you, but you're about the first Nazarene I met in upstate South Carolina. But my first sermon I heard you preach was on the call and how you kind of maybe debated with God a little bit on how you could kind of serve him, but also kind of be a layman. What was that like for you, kind of discerning that call where God said, nope, I want you in full-time ministry? What was that? Because it looks like maybe that was a little bit older in your life and you've been in the professional service for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. Nate, great to be with you, and thanks for inviting me on the podcast. And this is my first time. So I'm an avid podcast listener to various podcasts, and so on my bucket list is to be a guest on numerous podcasts that I listen to.
All right.
And so now you've helped me. Yeah, so I've checked off one.
Well, we're happy to be the first, so hopefully not the last. Yeah, hopefully this launches your podcasting career.
I was raised in a Nazarene parsonage. My dad was Nazarene. I'm fourth generation Church of Nazarene, so pastor's kid. My brother is a pastor in the Church of Nazarene, so we're kind of Levites, I guess, within the church. And I had a sense of call in my life, early as a teenager, attending youth camps and camp meeting and all those things. But just since that, the Lord may be calling me to be a faithful layman, because my brother was pursuing ministry and dad was pastor. So it just, for whatever reason in that moment, it felt a little cliche to say, hey, I'm called to ministry. And so, yeah, it was after college, as a young adult, that I surrendered the call. And you referenced that message. For me, my call to ministry really coincides with my entire sanctification experience. Because that was the last yes, I get, if I can use that phrasing. That was the last yes that I was holding back from the Lord, was putting that yes of full-time ministry. And prior to that, I was working for the YMCA, and thought that that's how I would serve my community and serve the church in that way. But just some things fell into place, and things happened that the Lord his voice was very loud and clear in a moment that no, I called you to full-time ministry, preaching ministry years ago. And this is the way I would like for you to go. And
did you kind of
experience.
Get the sense, as being a PK, that you were always in ministry? Did you kind of grow up in an environment where it's like you were always at church and you were always kind of serving one way or the other?
Yes, 100%.
What was that like, discerning through that? I mean, because what you're saying is that there was a definitive moment in time where God says, no, I want you to be, hate to use these terms, but professionally in ministry. But
vocational in ministry. Yep.
Yeah. So what was that like, kind of growing up? I don't know, in your older brothers in ministry, is that right?
Yeah. So my brother Mark is at Lenexa Central Church there in the Kansas City district.
Did he kind of sense it more clearly than you? Was that kind of always, what was that like, kind of growing up in that environment?
Yeah. So Mark is 4 years ahead of me. And, Mark was, Bible quizzer. I mean, from the very get-go, as early as I can remember, Mark has always discerned the call to be a pastor. Like, that was always the track that he was on. So that was very clear for him. And but both of us grew up in a home in which we loved the church. And this is why I love the local church. Because my brother and I, we were blessed with local churches that just love the pastoral family. My dad was very intentional about ministry there in our local community, and really making sure that we were rooted in. So I started kindergarten and graduated high school in the same town. which is, it's unusual
Yeah.
for a pastor's kid. And so, yeah, we were always immersed in ministry. My parents, I don't know what they did, but they raised us in a way that we both loved the church. And so whether it was singing, we were a family that sang. My dad loved Southern gospel music, so it was very common on a Friday or Saturday for us to hear, "Hey boys, we're going to sing, we're going to sing That Same Blood or some Spirit Family song tomorrow, and I just need I need y'all's help with it." And so here we are Saturday practicing the song so we can sing. Um, so yeah, I've always felt immersed in ministry, and that may be why I was a little hesitant with the call, because I was
Yeah.
trying to distinguish, what I know and what is actually the voice of the Lord.
Right. Yeah. And maybe even how to separate what you are doing, or even putting or formalizing what you're doing into, no, this is a clear, definitive call of ministry. I could see that being difficult. We'll be right back with the rest of this episode. But did you know you can receive credit for listening to Holiness Today podcasts? Holiness Today podcasts qualify for lifelong learning with the Church of the Nazarene. To register for lifelong learning, simply go to learning.nazarene.org. The Lifelong Learning Registry provides Nazarene ministers the opportunity to record and report their efforts to develop and maintain a pattern of lifelong learning. Every Nazarene minister is encouraged to engage in a variety of lifelong learning activities. The code for Holiness Today podcast will be listed in the show description. This code can be utilized for this episode and any previous episode you wish to listen to. Thank you for being a listener and sharing in the ministry of the Church of the Nazarene. Now back to the rest of your episode. You went off to Trevecca, is that right? Is that where so what did you study at Trevecca then?
So at Trevecca, my first semester, I was a physical education major because I thought I would teach. I enjoyed sports and thought I would teach, but quickly realized that a classroom teacher wasn't probably where I would fit, and so quickly changed over to history and political science. Always have had a love for history. Always had a love for politics. I grew up in a family that followed current events,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly had an opinion on those current events. And so studied that thinking, well, this could give me an option for law school. This could give me an option for, if I did want to teach, at some point. Honestly, Nate, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And
Yeah.
so, but I knew I loved Tribeca, and I knew that that's where God wanted me to be, and said, well, I'll study history and political science, and of course enjoyed that experience. And looking back, it actually has come in, very very handy. It's really cool seeing how the Lord orders our steps,
Yeah,
and
for
we
sure.
and redeem even redeems some of the missteps,
Yeah.
that maybe
Yeah,
we took.
absolutely. So after Trevecca is when you started working at the Y. Is that how that worked out? You started working at the YMCA
Yeah,
after that? Okay.
yeah. I graduated Tribeca, realized that probably didn't have the GPA to really be successful in going pursuing law. And not that was even a serious consideration, but just was like, well, what am I going to do? And had moved back to South Carolina. At this point, my mom and dad had moved to West Virginia, and they were pastoring on the North District of West Virginia. But I love South Carolina. That's where I wanted to be. That's there was a young lady there that I knew was there, and so that's how my wife Case and I reconnected as when I moved back. But wanted to just knew I needed to do something. And I loved history and political science, but let's be honest, it on an undergraduate level, I was qualified to read and write at the college level, right? I mean, as
Yeah.
far as like what marketable skill does this give you? Um, and so began to look for a job, and Case and I had been dating, and knew I needed to figure something out, and saw an ad for a sports director with the YMCA, and it's like, hey, I love sports. I have a little bit of a background. I did some work with the Boys and Girls Club in Nashville in college. Answered that. and just went through some and found myself at the YMCA, and it was really neat experience,
Yeah.
and
So
just
what
thought that
what
that's where I would be.
yeah. So what is your area of is it baseball? What's your favorite sport? What did you grow up playing? What's your
Uh, Basketball is my favorite. Is what I played
basketball?
in high
Okay.
school. Yeah,
Yeah.
went to a small Christian school. Actually, my school, I went to school where I went to church. So
Okay.
Orangeburg First Church of Nazarene had a K through 12 Christian academy on its campus that my dad was part of leading that effort to open that. And so small Christian school, we didn't have football, really didn't have baseball, but we had soccer and basketball. So I played soccer and basketball in high school. And so actually that's kind of why I got the job at the Y. I coached a little bit of soccer as I when I graduated Trevecca, just because not because I'm an expert, but because it was a small Christian school that just needed somebody who could at least organize kids. And so the YMCA kind of read that on my resume as, oh, you've coached soccer. We have a big soccer program. We want to talk to you about that. And I'm like, yeah, let me talk to you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
So
So that was in the Columbia area. Is that when you
yeah,
came back to
down
South Carolina?
yeah, was living in Columbia, and my wife Casey grew up at the West Columbia Central Church of Nazarene there in West Columbia, and so that's where we were attending. And and even then, I thought that maybe I could do full time ministry, youth
Hmm.
ministry there, but just things didn't work out. So I was at the YMCA, and so and they ended up hiring a youth pastor who is became a very good friend of mine. And so from the Y, became kind of the right hand volunteer, if you will, for the youth ministry there at that church, and worked there for 3 years. And so then that's 2008 kind of comes along. There's kind of the downturn in the economy, if anybody remembers that. So some that youth pastor moved, changed districts, and and so then they came to me and said, "Hey, can you do this part time?" And so then it was a situation where I was bivocational,
Yeah.
doing youth ministry.
So was that around the same time? Because I didn't, when you were talking about your sanctification moment or entire sanctification moment is that final yes. Was that around that same time or was it after you? Did you kind of just move into ministry working in youth because you were filling a need or had you already kind of felt that sense of I've got to jump in ministry? When was that moment for you? Was it after you were helping out with youth or
Yeah,
before?
it was
Around the
during.
same
So
time? Yeah.
part of doing youth ministry was I grew up kind of back to your first question. I grew up in the church. I
Yeah.
grew up in ministry.
Yep.
I got understood kind of how things work and what a senior pastor needs from a key volunteer from a staff position. And then I love youth ministry. I traveled when I was at Trevecca and did some youth camps, and so it was just kind of a natural thing for
Yeah.
me. And but it was in that moment, so it was in that season because things at the YMCA they went a different direction that didn't include me, and I was fine with that because there were some rhythms to that job that just wasn't conducive for Casey and I had just gotten married, and it just long term it wasn't going to be a good fit. And so it was in that season that we had a revival there at West Columbia Central. An evangelist came, a guy that I knew very well. I love telling the story. It's somebody that I grew up with, an evangelist I know very well, great evangelist. But when I heard that he was coming, it's like, oh, I've heard, I've heard him a few times, and just
Yeah.
it just didn't think anything about it, right? Um, but it was at that revival with an evangelist that I'd heard all my life, um, that the Lord really clearly, I shouldn't say Lord spoke, Lord has always been speaking. It was in that moment that I clearly heard. Like it was in that
Yep.
moment that I had finally opened my ears, to hear, open my eyes to see that vocational ministry is where the Lord had been leading me all this time.
Yeah.
And so looking back, you know, Trevecca history, political science degree, working at the YMCA, which at the Y, I managed over 1,200 kids who played soccer and other sports. And so there was a
Yeah.
budget with that. So looking back, the Lord provided me with some of this nonprofit
Hmm.
management experience that absolutely translated into, working at a church running a ministry, pastoring, things like that. So this is really really cool how the Lord
Yeah,
had either
absolutely.
ordered those steps or redeemed my missteps. You know.
Yeah. In listening to your sermons and perusing a little bit, you're pretty well read. I heard you
Oh,
layering a Moltmann quote, I think,
oh,
one sermon, and you read
thank you.
Dunning. At what point? I mean, you probably were just curious as a Trevecca grad, reading probably all over the place. History, I was a history major at Olivet, and my history advisor said the history students are always the smartest, so he was biased, but he might not have been thinking about me. But
I like that guy.
as a history major, you're pretty well read. That you kind of have to be.
Mm.
Were you always kind of curious about philosophy and theology as well at Trevecca, or did you kind of after you felt that call, did you kind of jump into that? At what point did you kind of start digging into more theological reading? Maybe you'd always been doing that.
Yeah, well, and I think the political science piece of a history degree, it leads you down, it leads you towards philosophy, right? Especially political philosophy, political thought. So, I was reading Augustine, I was reading, even modern as Martin Luther King Jr., right? Yeah, so that was kind of
Yeah,
the gambit of philosophical readings, and so yeah, always interested in that. Always was drawn to that. Even though I was a history major, I did a lot of electives with the religion department, the school of religion there at Trevecca. So was able to sit under professors like Dr. Tim Green, who's Old Testament professor at
yeah,
Trevecca, Dr. Steve Hoskins, who's a church historian there, and so that was it kind of gave me a taste of some of that. That once I answered the call, I knew I had to prepare for ministry,
yeah,
because just a history degree from Trevecca is not going to satisfy the course of study, and
yeah.
so that's when I entered the master's program at Northwest Nazarene University. So I'll give all the shout outs to all my schools here on this
Yeah, no, for
podcast,
sure.
Trevecca and
So,
Northwest.
yeah, very good. So, once you jump to that master's program, again, I do think there's a lot of translation, as you said, between history and poli sci and jumping into philosophy and theology. But did you feel like you had a leg up? Did you feel like you were right where you needed to be at? Did you feel like I got to catch up on some reading, or what was that like in that experience, kind of jumping in at that point?
Yeah, I didn't feel behind, but I certainly didn't feel like I had any kind of like leg up or anything,
Yeah,
because a lot of I did a Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry at NNU. That was 2000, like 9, 10. And so they were one of the first to really offer distance. So I didn't move to
yeah,
Idaho or anything, but they
yeah,
were one of the first ones to offer that true
yeah. I remember
online
that. Yeah,
synchronous type of delivery system. And so a lot of reading, a lot of video lectures, a lot of writing. So very similar rhythm to history of political science, but you read theology, you read biblical theology, things like that.
yeah. Was there any one theologian, author, maybe professor, probably several that you kind of just keyed off on and thought uh, maybe changed the way you think about things, or maybe encourage you to think deeper on some things you'd already
Yeah.
been kind of curious about?
So undergrad, Dr. Tim Green at Trevecca. There's not a brighter Old Testament theological
Yeah,
mind in our
yeah.
church than Tim Green. And
He's a
I mean
fantastic writer.
I'm a Trevecca guy, so I'm biased, but I still think
No,
that's
he's
correct.
he,
Uh,
he he's one of our best for sure.
yeah. So there, but at the master's level, I think professors like Dr. Brent Peterson, who is there at NNU,
Yeah,
uh, probably when I look back on that program, uh, he helped me he helped me develop or have a more robust theology on worship and the role of sacraments within the Christian rhythm and Christian journey. So he stands out, and it was really cool. Actually, so two of the general superintendents were my professors. So Dr. Carla Sundberg taught; she was adjunct at the time for NNU, and then
wow,
Dr. Scott Daniels
yeah,
was my preaching professor at a
yeah.
unit there at NNU. So that's been kind of
That's
neat
fun. Yeah, that is
to
neat. So, what was your favorite? Maybe not class, but subject area within your Master's of Arts that you like studying? Was it preaching ministry, or was there any specific thing you thought, this is where I feel?
probably church history is always an easy one to jump onto, just natural for me. But really, uh, preaching. We took two preaching courses within that, and so and I think part of that is that I knew that was the center of my call. Like
Hmm.
is the preached word and um the depth there and the power that is in the preached word. Not because of anything that we've done, just because but it's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit who not only inspired the writing of our scriptures, but in the same way inspires the hearers and the inspires a proclamation. When we faithfully
Hmm.
proclaim
Hmm.
proclaim that. So I think the preaching classes is what stood out to me within that as far as preparing for ministry.
We were kind of texting back and forth talking about it, but you kind of like to write your sermon series, right? You kind of like to structure that out so you use your writing skills that you had, that you've
Hmm.
developed over the years, but maybe share a little bit about how preaching is kind of the external proclamation of your internal writing creativity. I mean, obviously, in preparation for ministry, what does that? I mean, preparation for preaching, what does that look like for you? Do you have a certain method of, okay, I'm going to set this time aside and
Hmm.
uh, in prayer and reflection and kind of see what comes out on the page? Do you have it pre-planned out for the year? What does that look like for you? Obviously, there's a little bit of a hybrid between the seasonal church, but
Hmm.
and you've probably developed that over time as well. But if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. There's a couple methods that I follow. Like my weekly routine is usually Monday. Monday is kind of a looking back at what we just preached on Sunday. Um, Kind of thoughts from that, but then that also just moves me right into reading for the next week. And so um, usually on that Monday, I haven't obviously I know when I'm preaching in 7 days or in 6 days. I know when I'm preaching. Normally, there's a kind of a general idea, of what that's going to be, but that Monday is really diving into that further and maybe beginning to putting some muscle on some of the skeleton there. And then Tuesday, Wednesday is usually kind of really administrative, just kind of managing the church and things like that. Um, and then Thursday is really where I try to like then bring that home. Now outside of that, there's weeks where I'll be intentional about scheduling one of our staff members to preach, or maybe even two Sundays in a row for them to preach. So then that gives me bandwidth within that time to look 3 months out. I'm not one that I've never been one to do a year out, just because
Yeah.
I don't think my ADHD really allows me to do that.
Right.
And I'm also I can I love to prepare, but I can also, if I need to kind of shoot from the hip, I want to be kind of flexible to do that. I don't do that often, but so I do about 3 months out. But even beyond 3 months, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm processing. Hey, what are felt needs?
Yeah.
What is the Lord speaking to me about within our congregation? Um, 'Cause I tend to think that my preaching is very pastorally. Like I would not be a good evangelist. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
And what I mean is I don't find myself being very comfortable preaching to folks that I do not know. Like just showing up and
Yeah.
I take a very kind of pastoral approach to preaching, walking with the community, walking with the people,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So, so that's kind of weekly rhythm, and then throughout the year having those moments of planning that out, and then of course that includes the lectionary.
Yeah.
Leaning on the lectionary, not all year, but there are key parts throughout the year that I will
Right.
certainly lean on the lectionary.
At what point? So I'm kind of perusing your development. So you started at your Master's of Arts, but you were still in doing youth ministry, and then while you were in your Master's of Arts, you got the call to Camden. Were you moving into a lead pastor role while you were in school?
Hmm.
Am I reading that correctly? That looks like a busy time in your life.
A little bit. I graduated, wrapped up NNU like the January of 2010. Like I finished that December, and then I walked or graduated really May of 2010, and then it was 11 when we moved to Camden. So there was a little bit of a merge there, but I was kind of bringing the master's degree to a close, and then
Hmm.
ramping into senior pastor ministry. My daughter was also born during that time. I bought
Oh
my
wow. Yeah.
Addison was born May 31st of 2010, and so that was I had like one more semester of graduate school after, when she was born.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still I thank her every day because she was a great baby. I mean, she was a baby that once 7:30 hit, you just gave her, you fed her and rocked her, and she was out. And
Wow.
then I
Yeah.
was right, writing papers and kind of all that. So it wasn't too bad. But got the call to Camden, then there in 2011,
Yeah.
and that was part of I was in youth ministry for a little bit and loved youth ministry, but always knew that part of my call was to lead a local church. And I think a part of that is I love the local church. I believe, like all of us, the local church is the medium, is the
Yeah.
conduit in which the Spirit wants to bring about the kingdom of God here on earth.
Yeah.
It's
Amen.
not a social
Yeah.
construct. It's not a social organization. It's not a civic organization. It's the church of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
knew I wanted to be a part of that and leading
Yeah.
leading the congregation.
Several pastors have spent time in youth ministry or full-time youth ministry. I can think of several before they took on a lead pastor role. Uh, what things did you learn as a youth pastor that maybe translated directly over or carried directly over to lead pastor?
Hmm.
In what ways do you think that prepared you? And what were some of the things you took on as a lead pastor and you thought maybe I wasn't prepared for this or I've never done this before? What did that look like
Yeah,
making that transition for you?
yeah. Great question. And I'm going to say this statement. I'm going to make this statement, and there are listeners who are not going to agree with this, but I firmly believe every pastor needs to spend some years in associate staff ministry.
Hmm.
It just it even from the very basic of um, uh, an apprenticeship type of structure. Like I don't think we have that well in our church sometimes. We go straight from academia into like practical ministry. And so for me, and again, for me, it was very helpful to have uh, years being in staff ministry because at least for youth ministry, I saw it as a microcosm. It's a
Yeah.
microcosm of the
Yeah.
church. I've got these 16, 17, 20 or so, some, students that meet every week, and you're preaching to them, you're structuring their small groups, you're discipling them, uh, you're answering their calls, their texts, kind of helping them work through things. They've got families, and so it's a microcosm of a bigger church. And then also there's some tough things that it's nice that the lead pastor has to, hey, you got to handle that, and I get to watch you handle that. And so I know my time's coming, but there was a season where I get to watch him or her handle that. And so that just, I think that prepares, for me, it prepared me to, when I went to the lead pastor ministry, you kind of go in knowing the score. If I could use that
Hmm.
metaphor, you kind of
Hmm.
go in, knowing how things go, knowing how people work. I mean, because just on a very practical matter, as a pastor, you're working with people, and so there
Hmm.
is a social science, if you will, to to pastoring, right? Because
Yeah.
it's some of it is just knowing how
Certainly.
people work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would recommend anyone who's younger, be intentional about trying to spend time in being able to kind of be in
Yeah.
the side seat, if you will, sidecar, if you will, for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one thing that, and again, I'll maybe have to edit this. We'll see. So heresy coming. No, it's not heresy, but maybe poking coming. And this might even be self-deprecating. This might be poking at things I've said in the past, but um, I've kind of heard it said, and this is a caricature for sure, that well, youth ministry or youth ministers, they make it fun for the kids. The kids have so much fun, and they get into where they're in college age and adult, and then they just stop going to church. I've heard it said that way, and obviously, if I've heard it said that way, that's a church that's probably struggling to connect with the youth one way.
Hmm.
But I kind of started thinking about that differently in some of the more positive experiences I've experienced. I think of Roland Tedder at Kansas City First. I think of John Eigsty he was, on the youth. He's a head pastor now. Both of them have moved from youth ministry into head pastor. That in their transition, not that the ministry of the local church was about fun, but that they took that kind of theology, that campus ministry, that pastoral ministry that they developed as youth ministers, and they continued that positive environment into adult ministry. And so I guess what I'm saying is I've tried to flip that question on its head and say, is that a challenge? I mean, that might be a challenge to youth ministers to be more to educate our children more theologically. That could be a challenge. But is there kind of a challenge towards lead pastors to say, hey, why aren't you having fun anymore? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah, and I noticed that with you that it looks like you have fun. It looks like Hope Point has fun, but in what ways can maybe some of our theological lead pastors um, maybe learn to have a little more fun? Is there something there that they could learn from youth ministry? I don't know. The
Sure.
over seriousness of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, that was a large poke, but just something that I've kind of processed through as I've just observed successful pastors.
I know something that has that impacted me years ago, and thankfully we're seeing this. This is kind of a popular practice in these days. But Growing Young was a study
Hmm.
and a book put out by Kara Powell and the team out there in the seminary out in California, and Fuller Theological Seminary.
Yeah.
And they talk about this analogy of giving the keys, giving the keys to the car to our young people. And
Yeah.
we all remember when we were 14, 15, 16, when we first got our license, and the sense of freedom when the parents said, here are the keys to the car. And so at the church, what at Hope Point, and I'm not saying, I mean, others are doing this, so I'm not trying to say we're the only ones, but we want to be very intentional about giving those keys to our young people and
Hmm.
involving students. Yeah, having fun and all those things, but also involving them in the rhythms of the church.
Hmm.
For us, we have a lot of intergenerational worship times outside of Sunday, of course. But then like throughout the year, like on Wednesdays, because like our rhythm, like on Wednesdays, youth groups doing their thing, kids ministry doing their thing. We have small groups, but 4 or 5 times a year we come together on a Wednesday, and it's intergenerational. We're packing crisis care kits together, or we're doing what we call gather around the table, where we present a thought process or a question, and then we invite different generations to unpack that and to discuss that. And so, yeah, I would encourage all pastors to you know don't take yourself so seriously. Be bold and engage young people in your worship services, whether it's reading scripture, being a part of a praise team, being a greeter. My son works is in one of our foyers every Sunday, and he's greeting, he's helping our kids check in throughout about once a month, and he's just an example of other his age that are doing that type of thing. Our cafe here at our church on Sundays is half of the team is 15-year-olds, that are doing that.
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah.
that gives them like this sense of like ownership of the church, and kind of back to your question of, they turn 18 and then they leave.
Right.
I think that helps mitigate that, because
Yep.
early on they
Yeah.
know this is my church. This isn't my mom and dad's church. This is my church. And so I think it kind of helps mitigate
Yeah.
that that drift that can happen sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So, yeah, that was kind of a sorry for that deep dive there, but it's something I've been kind of
No,
kind of
no.
thinking about because I think the ownership on that is the whole church, as you put it, the integration of the whole church. But just thinking through how lead pastors and youth pastors connect on those things. But and then certainly there's just the difficulty of it seems like my generation and the younger generation, they go off to college, and everyone's moving around, so you're kind of losing those legacy families that you grew up having in churches. So that makes it difficult as
Hmm.
well. So no
Yeah.
specific poke at anyone. It was just something.
Yeah.
Caveat,
Well, and
caveat, caveat.
and just real quick, I think in the age of megachurch, and this isn't, I'm not talking about Nazarene. I'm just, just in general, in
Yeah.
the age of seeing churches that are, huge campus churches, and you see the
Hmm.
polished, and forgive me using this word, but the polished production. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It just is. That's just the only word I can think of. We kind of think, oh man, we've got to, we got to imitate that. And I'm like, you know what?
Hmm.
It's okay to be messy. Like, I'm not messy. It's okay to be
Yeah.
like, let's not lose our authenticity or our sense of family because we feel like we've got to produce, like this really packaged product.
Yeah.
And I get it. There's a level in which you have such a big crowd or such a big attendance that's just, you just have to manage things that way. I get that. So I'm not knocking that. But I think all pastors have to scale. Everything is scalable. Um, you've got to, don't, be who you are. Don't try to be what you're not. And I think it's okay to introduce, to just keep that sense of family and authenticity within our services. That includes, having that younger generation
Yeah.
as a vital part of our rhythms.
Certainly. Certainly. Well, so while you were at Camden, kind of a unique story or thing that happened in your life, which I find fascinating because of our mutual love of history and politics. But you felt the call, if I can put it that way, you felt the call to politics a little bit. But what did that look like for you? What did that opportunity open up? People approached you, if my understanding of the story correctly, but uh, share a little bit about how you kind of used your history and poli sci background, your love of getting
Yeah.
involved in civics, and did that while you were a pastor. If you could share
Sure.
that a bit.
Yeah, I love South Carolina, love South Carolina history and politics. Like I'm a guy who I will go to the State House in Columbia and just hang out and watch the House of Representatives, watch the
Yeah,
Senate do its thing.
yeah,
So I moved to Camden, and it's a small community. And just it's one of those communities in which is, if you go to the same coffee shop every day, week after week, you're going to get to know everyone's name, right? They're going to know who you are. They're going to know your story. Um, there was a neat, just nonprofit community there, churches that came together to help and establish needs and things like that, and got involved in some of those things, and so just was able to, beyond my own congregation, just make connections within the community. In fact, my first Christmas that I was in Camden, the mayor of Camden had reached out to me and said, "Hey, you're a new pastor in the community. I'd love for you to come pray for the Christmas tree lighting in the community."
yeah,
Um, I thought that was like the coolest thing.
for sure.
That mayor's now a state senator. In fact, had lunch with him just 2 weeks ago. And so I was like, man, it's your fault. You asked me to come. That was
Right.
like my
Yeah.
first, like, oh,
There's your
this
first
could be,
taste. Yeah.
well, first a glimpse of, as a pastor, we're called to
The
pastor the
connectivity of
community,
that.
the
Yeah.
connectivity,
Yeah.
and that was, some of that was instilled by my dad. My dad pastored that way. My dad he had hundreds of people that people would call him, oh, that's my pastor. They never came to
Hmm.
church,
Hmm.
or they were connected here, but just through different, things like that. So was involved, and then just really began to sense in 2016, 17, really began to sense, hey, I'm involved this way in the nonprofit world, but would love to be able to make a difference in a different way, and a different level, and through the avenue of local politics. And part of this might be Dr. Scott Daniels doing, because at the time he wrote the book Living in Exile. And it was in that book that we are reminded, Jeremiah 29:7, that that's a season in the history of the people of God, of Israel, where, hey, you're in exile. You think that this exile is going to be like a 5 or 10 years. But Jeremiah, the prophet, he tells the people, you need to settle in.
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, marry your kids off, settle
Yep.
in. Um, yeah, and so 29:7, seek the peace and prosperity of the city that I
Yeah.
have placed you. When it prospers, you will prosper. And so this whole idea that the people of God, uh, in today, the people of God are like, we're in exile, right? So we're in this land that is not ours, right? So I mean, as much as we love the United States, I would not want to live in any other political system, political structure than in the United States. But our first allegiance is to the kingdom of God. That's our citizenship. And so, but while we're here in this place, we're called to seek the peace and prosperity of it, to settle in and to be, to be that embodiment of the kingdom. And so that really got my wheels turning. And um, opportunity came. There was a local county council. So in South Carolina, every county has a county council. Some states may call it commissioners. And so that kind of manages the county. They get involved in all kind of really cool debates like solid waste and sewage and roads. Like all the political things that make the
Right.
news, right?
Right. All
And
those important. Well, those things, if they don't
yeah,
get taken care of, you'll find out real
right,
quick why
right.
you need
Well,
those people debating those things.
I say that tongue in cheek because we get
Yeah,
so wrapped up on what the news cycle is telling us.
absolutely,
But what
absolutely.
really impacts you is whether or not
Sewage.
that sewer line's going to come through, or how we're paying for the road, or how we're paying for the
Right.
schools and all that. So I had my eye on that. And so I dug into to the electoral history of that particular seat to
Hmm.
catch the trend, what kind of candidate has won,
Yeah.
all of those things. And there was a guy who was in that seat. Um, he was very, very popular guy. And I was like, well, as long as he's there, like I'm not going to run against him. Like it's just not going to happen, nor as being a pastor in the community, you don't want to, I didn't want to run against someone. Like I didn't want to
Yeah.
be in a situation where I've got to tell you why that person's no good and while I'm good, Well, news breaks that he decides he's going to run for county auditor. Uh, Now you may edit this out because I'm going to get really deep into South Carolina
No,
stuff, so
you're good.
people may not care. But and so in South Carolina, the auditor is somebody who works. It's a county official who sets the what's called the millage rate, or they kind of help judge how valuable your property is, how valuable your car is, things like that. So when that breaks, I'm like, looked at my wife. I said, "This is it. The seat's going to be open." We talked about it. We kind of prayed through it, and so she was like, "Let's yeah." Kind of was like, "Let's. I think you can do it." And so um, I had forged some friendships with lifers in that community
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
knew I was going to run. So I got them, kind of got them on my bandwagon, um and I'll tell this part of the story because this is it's a picture of the relationship between me and my wife, and just I love my wife because there was a moment where I said I was going to run, and then three other people got in that race. And one name in particular was a name that had money with it, just between family, and just had some notoriety. And I came home like 2 weeks after I was like, yeah, I'm going to run. Came home and I was like, she's like, what's wrong? I said, well, I got to call so and so is going to jump on the race. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I don't know if we can do it. And she looked at me and she said, are you going to, this is what you've wanted to do. This is all you've talked about. Are you going to let that one person knock you out of the race? Because that person, he had called me and to say, hey, I'm going to be in the race. I want to introduce myself. But it was kind of a political thing of like
Yeah.
trying to, And
Scare you
so
out of
she's
it a little
like,
bit. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And she looked at me and she said, you go run. This is
Yeah.
what you want to do. This is what you think the Lord's called you to do. Don't let money or notoriety keep you from doing this. And like I get chill bumps because it's like, yes, that's my girl,
Yeah.
and that's kind of who she is to me, like in all kind of ways. Like she's the one that's like coaching me and like go, 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 kind of a thing. So um put together a campaign and was able to had four of us that were running, and that went through a primary. So it was an election where all of the candidates were in one party. The other party didn't have any candidates in it. And so the election was in the primary, and made it to the runoff. So because in South Carolina, if you don't get 50% plus one, then you go to a runoff with the top two.
Yeah.
So went through the whole idea, the whole experience of campaigning, knocking on doors, and went to a runoff, and I won by 14 votes. So every
Wow.
vote counts. Every vote
Yeah.
counts.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, especially you see that in those local elections, how important those knocking on doors becomes when those things happen. So that's pretty impressive. So for our local pastors listening, maybe a word of encouragement, but the importance of getting involved in your communities, the world may say is political, being political, but what would you say to local pastors listening about the importance of maybe kind of getting out and seeing what's going on in the communities?
Yeah, I think it is I think it's our call to kind of to live out the Jeremiah 29:7 and to be involved in our community, to to speak into to speak into situations in which, whether it's people who are hurting, or to speak in situations in which decisions from our leaders that maybe are leading us down, things of immorality. I think there's a clear call, and it is certainly appropriate to be involved. Now, what I'm not saying, and this is, if people who know me, who have been under my preaching, what I'm not saying is there's never a place for us to get up at the pulpit and say, you need to vote for so and so.
Hmm.
Like you need, like, or because, as you know, I have my own political leanings. I have political convictions. There's certainly one party that I align with more than the other, but no party embodies the kingdom of God, the ethics of the kingdom, 100%. I just don't. I don't think um, the Sunday morning pulpit is a place for us to preach the principles of a party. I think it's appropriate that we preach the principles of the kingdom of God, and we
Hmm.
preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And there, if we do that, there will be Sundays in which some people in the aisle will be like, "Amen, that's right." But then there may be Sundays where the other people on the other side of the aisle say, "Yeah, that's right." Um, for example, the church that I'm in now, when you look at the demographics of the church around HopePointe, and in fact, our church is a voting precinct, so the election office uses our building as for voting. So usually I'll go and I'll pull the data. In fact, I think this is a neat little this is a neat thing to do for all pastors. Look at the voting data of the precinct of that your church is in, and that gives you the breakdown. Like that gives you more. I think more than any other demographical study gives you the breakdown of who's
Oh,
around your
certainly.
community. When you look at, how many straight party this party voted, or straight party the other way voted, and all that. So when I look at that around Hope Point, it's very 50-50. And
Yeah.
so if I'm going to be faithful to the gospel, if I'm going to be faithful to be in a position to speak gospel, to speak Christ into all people, then it doesn't behoove me to get up and proclaim one particular party. What it does behoove is that we proclaim the gospel of Christ, which is what we do every Sunday.
Hmm.
So, so when I say get involved, I think that looks like getting involved on the local level, volunteering at our schools. You know, if the school around the corner from your church, if their reading level is below level, then that's everyone's problem. And what does it look like for the church leaders to get involved in that local school, to say, hey, how can we help? How can we come alongside the teachers? How can we come alongside the school to help get reading level, up? I think it looks like a variety of ways that it goes beyond the politics that you see on the news, but local issues that are not Republican, Democrat, local issues that impact us all. And so I think it's important for us to get involved in that.
Well, and what you said at the outset of this is that, you were asked to pray in a public meeting. I would imagine you wouldn't have been asked to pray in a public meeting had you not been meeting people and going to public meetings throughout your life. So just kind of the
Correct.
involvement, being
Correct.
present. Yeah. Yeah.
Correct. 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 Now, and granted, when we're asked to pray, I would also not. I mean, I pray in the name of Jesus when I'm in those public things,
Yeah.
because I feel like freedom
Yeah.
of um freedom of speech gives me, that's the freedom to pray publicly how you pray privately.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the interpretation of that. Um, so so I'm not
Yeah.
saying like try to make everything vanilla, I think we certainly continue to be
Yeah.
bold,
Yeah.
but
Absolutely. Absolutely. At some point in your stint in politics, you were kind of being asked to continue onward, perhaps upward, onward and upward in that sphere. Uh, if you can share a little bit, but there was a little bit of a wrestling kind of going on in you with God. He didn't say no to you,
Mhm.
if I understand correctly, but what did that look like for you where
Yeah,
you couldn't let go of the local church ministry?
sure. Yeah, and you know, to characterize it like that, I don't want to characterize it as if I was a shoe in. Like that's not at all
No,
what I'm
yeah,
saying
but
because
they were
you know,
encouraging you to stay in it
yeah, yeah,
and to do
there
it.
was
Yeah,
an
yeah,
encouragement from leaders like, hey, I mean, we love your involvement. We love
yeah.
kind of how you approach because I'm very pragmatic in my approach to politics, and I was certainly the person in the room who in true Wesley fashion, right, finding the the via media, right, and so um so there were conversations about, hey, this person will retire soon, and they've got the House seat, or this person's gonna, when the maps get redrawn, that means it's going to put you in this Senate seat, and so there were those conversations, and certainly those were conversations with people who had worked on campaigns and knew how to get people elected, and that certainly was. I really enjoyed being in those conversations. Not for any kind of like popularity thing. I just really nerd and geek out on the process, of how things happen. But in that time, the Lord began to speak to me about a church on our district. Had been at that point was in Camden 10 half going on 11 years, and the Lord began to speak to me about, what does ministry look like going forward? And my call into local politics always came with this caveat that this is where you are to be for now, but that isn't a green light to this is where you're going to be, for this is not your new path. This is how I am using you while you're in this community. And so and that was always my prayer through that was I wanted to stay close to the Spirit to make sure that I never lost sight of the primary yes and the primary call to preach the word and to the local church. And so the district superintendent had begun to ask me about Hope Point, or at the time Greenville First, and eventually Hope Point Church, and we were we were blessed in that we were in a situation where we didn't have to leave. Like it wasn't like I wasn't looking like, oh, I've got to, things are tough here, or I feel like I've done all I can do. I'm at my wit's end. Like I just, I didn't really have the necessarily itch to have to go somewhere. I did have an inclination that the Lord was up to something, that whether we were going to change drastically where we were as far as how we're leading, where the church is going, things like that, or he was wanting me to, to go somewhere else. Like I knew there was a wrestle there, and so when we began to have the conversation about moving to Greenville, uh, it was it was very clear that your primary call was to the local church, because I love the local church. I don't think a political body can bring about the kingdom of God. I think it's a local church. And I also love churches that have history. The church I was at in Camden was formed in 1940 45. Greenville's got roots back to 1943, officially 1946. And so I love seeing the revitalization of these churches that have a rich history, and who may be in seasons in which they feel like the glory days were are in their rearview mirror. But that's not that's I don't think that's what scripture says. I mean, I think we scripture shows us a God who is always recreating, a God who is always doing something new. And And so I have this love for seeing churches, revitalized. And so this was, you know, that's what the Lord was speaking to me about. And so yeah, there was this wrestle, but ultimately, um, I will surrender to the call. And you could say this is an example of, when we're entirely sanctified, we put our yes on the altar of God. And then, you say, oh, is it a crisis moment or is it a journey? It's like, well, yeah, it's both. It is the crisis moment of needing to fully surrender, but then we have to stay attuned to the spirit to say, so every day, we put our yes on the altar of God, even before we know what the question is. And so, um, been here three years now, and uh, I have never been I've never been in a place where I felt like I was more in the center of God's will than I am right now. And I'm always want to communicate that, one, because it's true. Two, like I never want to tell a past story and kind of tell it as, oh yeah, that was really good, that was really fun,
Right. Right.
to belittle where I am now, because I think it has all led to this moment. And my wife Casey and I and our family, we couldn't feel more in the center in the center of God's will than we are right now. And we're seeing the Lord do some amazing things through this church. And it's exciting. It's
Yeah.
exciting to see what God's doing.
So as you came into Greenville first, now Hope Point, what were some of the transitions? Obviously, a name transition, but what were some of the things that you brought with you that maybe you see you're still seeing manifest at Hope Point? What are some of the things you're seeing where God's working right now at where you're currently serving?
I think the Lord used I think the Lord used my value of relationships. And that's not to say that previous pastor or any other pastor doesn't value relationships, but we all know that there's different kind of leaders, right? There are leaders who are really good at making decisions, and boom, we're doing this. And there are times, there are seasons in an organization, in a church, where band-aids got to come off. We have to make these decisions. I think the Lord knew that this church was in a season in which they needed someone who just the primary concern was to build relationships, to love, and to shepherd people. And for decisions of change, or if there is a decision of change, then those decisions are made and formed out of relationships that have been established and have been built, and kind of a level of trust. So I'm not just the pastor who came in and just said, well, we've been doing this wrong, so we're all going to do it like this now. It was more of hey, I just want to come in and love you. I'm one of you. I want to know your story. Like I'm big, really big on story. I'm big on trying to embody an organization's or a church's story. I wasn't here 20 years ago, but I learned the story in such a way that when I speak about 20 years ago, I use vernacular, I use speech that kind of like, oh yeah, I was here. You become
Hmm.
that familiar with the story. And I think as leaders, if we can do that, if we can embody the story of the past and then speak to the future from that position, from that posture, in my experience, it seems to be very, 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 very beneficial to help move a church forward. And so I think the Lord
Yeah.
knew there was that kind of need for just a focus on relationships.
Yeah. And so the virtue of hope, why did that become an identifier for Hope Point? What was that? What was the process of prayer and discernment that God spoke to you at that point in time?
Greenville First had began in 43 downtown Greenville. They took a break because of World War II. So 46 was the original established date. They've been Greenville First for years. And of course, in the 80s and 90s, went under the moniker First Church or Greenville First, which very, very common, whether you're talking about Nashville First or,
Right. Yeah.
Kankakee
Yeah.
First, right? That's just very common in that era. And So that's kind of how you knew the church. But our neighbor, our neighboring church is Greenville First Assembly of God. And so there was always kind of this, even on the local radio stations here, local Christian radio would say, Stephen Curtis Chapman's coming in concert, Greenville First, Haywood Road. And you're like, Stephen Curtis Chapman's coming to our church? And I was like, oh no, it's the other Greenville First, and so there was that. And then prior to me coming here, um, probably about 9, 10 years ago, then they moved towards using the initials GFN, Greenville First Nazarene. But that also stood for God, Family, Neighbor, which was kind of a core value that they wanted, that we wanted to emphasize. Which it's great. One of God, family, neighbor. Those are three things that should be a part of any church, right? Um, and so kind of went to GFN. That's how our people in the district knew us. That was on the sign. Like the sign was just the letters GFN Church. And so when that happened, our neighboring church, that kind of, they were able to take on like Greenville First, like they fully embodied that, right? Because now we're GFN. And I came here. I had no desire to change the name of a church, or not me. I had no desire to lead a church through a name change. I've honestly, I've kind of been cynical. Like, I'm the guy who was on Facebook. I'm like, oh man, so and so changed the name of the church. Look, they're trying to be cool. They're trying to be cool.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Yeah.
I've been that cynical critic on the Facebook on the Facebook screen, on that side of the screen.
Right. Right.
And but the more I got involved in the community, I found myself always answering the question, what does GFN stand for? What does
Mhm.
GFN stand for?
Mhm.
Um, and just for whatever reason, the God, family, neighbor of those three letters, it it faded, I guess. I mean, it was still there in some of our language, but not prominent. And so answering that question, um, and then that was we were in a season of we just wanted to ask ourselves, who are we to the community? Who what is, like, where are we in God's story, and who do we want to be? All right. So who are we, and who do we want God to shape us to be, or how do we want God to form us? And so we begin to ask ourselves those questions. And so during this time, I mean, we're seeing growth. We're seeing people that are coming to our church through different ways. And so we begin to seek out stories. Hey, tell me about how you came to this church. Tell me what you've experienced. Tell me um, how God has shaped your story through the story of this church. So 2 years prior to the name change, I did a sermon series on the story. I did a sermon, and it was talk about books. Andrew Root, When Church Stops Working, which is, that book is just kind of a synopsis of a bigger, deeper academic work. So um, that series was inspired by that particular book. And in that book he really emphasized, churches, like, we got to get back to the basics of the story of God. We got to get back to the basics. We can't, there's nothing to invent. Like, we try to reinvent all this stuff, but it just goes back to inviting people into the redemptive story of God. And so we really focused on that. And so that led to hearing people's stories. And for, from that, words like hope, transformation, and family and compassion really began to rise to the top. So we kind of did like a word study on all these stories. Like, what are the big words that come out? And from there, we use that to establish our core values. And so, HopePointe Church, we are rooted in hope, so that we can help others experience the transforming love of God. Rooted in hope to help others experience the transforming love of God. So hope, transformation. Those are the two things. And then from hope and transformation, it leads us to be a people of compassion, and then a people of family. And so that that came to be. And we were, so at that point the church board knew they identified we have a problem in our name. We have a problem in that people, they cannot easily identify us as to who we are, what GFN stands for, or stands for. Yeah, and we present to the congregation. We said, "Hey, just want you to know, your church board has identified that um, there needs to be a change." We didn't say that we are changing. We just said we identified that there's this issue, and we are asking ourselves these questions: Who are we? Who do we want to be? Who do we want to become? And that kind of began a year of search. And then uh, we had a couple name ideas, and then it just went back to let's just let's lean into a name that's reflected in these core values that we've established. And so the word hope is the is the word that came to the top. It's everyone knows what it means. Like even if you're unchurched, you have a general context of what the word hope means. And then point was simply to help us communicate. This is a place. This is a location in which the hope of Christ can be found. And also on a practical matter, point spelled with an E, which that spelling communicates geography, a place, versus point without E, which is like I'm trying to make a point. That word point is used in a lot of um, properties around our church. So subdivision down the road is Hudson Point. The apartments beside us is Haywood Point. The road around our church is there's a road called Wood Point. And so we just that was kind of natural, like, hey, let's put these together. And so that's the Reader's Digest version, I guess, of that process.
So, in what ways do you feel that Hope Point, taking your kind of experience of being connected into the community, I'm sure you brought that with you, but in what ways do you think or do you feel that Hope Point is connecting well with the community around it? You mentioned the name, there's an identifying mark
Hmm.
there,
Hmm. Hmm.
but what are some of the tangible, practical ways in which Hope Point is engaging with the overall larger Greenville
Hmm.
community?
2 years ago, when we were on this name change journey, we also, we're intentional about we want the Lord to help us with ministries that will give us continual impact and like like build relationships with families. So not just the one-off events, which those are important and those kind of have their thing, but like what are ministries that really um, connect us with families year in and year out. And it was during this time that USA Canada, they launched the initiative, the cycle of resurgence, right? And so we've all been, we spent a year praying, seeking, and then it moved towards, okay, how are we blessing our communities? And so that really, so just kudos to Dr. Stan and the staff at USA Canada. Like that has been very, very helpful. Even just from the standpoint of just encouragement and like coaching and like kind of putting our feet to the fire, if you will. So that really helped us engage and explore, okay, what are these options? And so through that initiative, the Church of Nazarene established a partnership with Upward Sports. Um, as far as if a Nazarene church wanted to partner with Upward to provide sports ministry to its neighbors, there was a grants. There were all kind of incentives, and so we had we'd always kind of thought about Upward, and so that really kind of helped push. So then we established sports ministry, partnering with Upward to offer soccer first, and then basketball. And what came of that is really, really cool. We thought we were just going to offer a recreational league for kids who, you know, kids that are not going to go play travel. Like, there's two levels of rec sports, right? There's the level in which the parents assume that their kid's the next Pele or whatever, and so they're all tongue in cheek, right? But the kid's really good. Hey, we really want them to pursue this sport with all. And then there's the kid who's like, you know what, I just need to be outside. I just need to be a part of a team. I need to learn a skill. I enjoy soccer, but just not on that level. And so we thought we would just be an outlet for those families. Well, I'm in a meeting at our partner school, Lake Forest Elementary School. I'm a member of the School Improvement Council there. Uh, School Improvement Councils every school has one in South Carolina. It's a directive from the Department of Education for our state, and it's community leaders and parents who just help improve the school, obviously. And was in a meeting, and we were hearing from a representative from World Relief. World Relief settles political refugees in Greenville. And a lot of those families go to Lake Forest because when families get settled here, there's an apartment where they all live, and so that school is zoned for them. And she made the comment. She goes, "Hey, really, think about our families because a lot of these families they come here, they've only been here a couple of weeks, they have no social, they have no social structure, right? They have no social outlet. A lot of these kids are looking for recreation." And I said, "Do you think they want to play soccer?" And you're talking about kids from
Yeah.
Myanmar, Pakistan, just all over. And she was like, "Yeah, they want to play soccer." And I was like, "Well, we just started this league. Let me know how many you have. We're gonna scholarship these kids." So through the grant that USA Canada gave us for blessing our community, we used that grant to pay for um 8, 10, 12 refugee families for them to play soccer. We, gave them their cleats, their shin guards, everything, fee and everything. Um, and it's interesting because a lot of these families they're coming from Muslim countries, and so that's their faith, and um, it's been neat to see I mean, obviously they don't attend our church. They haven't gotten there yet, but on Upward Sundays and other community events, like they're on our campus. In fact, we hosted our church. They used our building hosted an engagement party for a Pakistani family who needed a place to have this party. Um, and it was within their tradition, but they used they used some common space that we have. And so
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
we've kind of
Yeah.
become we've kind of become that community center for that,
Yeah.
and that came through that. And so those are ways in which we're seeing God stir hope. Our small group ministry. You know, you're hearing stories. In fact, we've got at least there are 2 or 3 ladies that are in our church now as a direct result of our ladies ministry and this in the small group there. They didn't come to a Sunday morning service necessarily. They heard about this small group and that happens on Wednesdays, and then introduced them to this group of ladies. And so then now, so things like that, we're seeing we're seeing God work and move and use that thread of hope to reach our community.
Well, I gave you this question before the interview, so here it comes. You ready for this question?
All right,
See
I
if you're
forgot
prep.
about it.
See if you're prepped for it. Sweet tea, or just tea in general.
Amen.
It's kind of a food group, so to speak, in South Carolina. Why is that? You're a history buff. Have you ever dug deep into the history of uh, tea in South Carolina? What's the connection there?
Yeah. Well, those of us who know our history, we know that the Boston Tea Party,
I was wondering if it went back to that.
initiated this great revolt against Britain and their taxes without representation. And so the northern part of the colonies, they were really big on, we're going to drink coffee
Hmm.
a point of protest to the king, to the crown. But what people don't realize, the southern part of the colonies they were probably more established with Britain than the northern,
Hmm.
largely probably because of agriculture, right? So this is where the crop was grown. You had quick access to ports like Savannah and Charleston, so there was a financial uh, agenda there as to why the southern colonies probably didn't jump on the tea ban as quickly as the northern colonies. So I think you have that, as well as just kind of what I've understood. You take into consideration climate. So
Yeah.
you've been here a little bit, so it's hot and it's muggy. And what I don't want to drink is hot coffee in the middle of
Yeah.
the day. So
Yeah.
I would imagine at some point Southerners began to develop, hey, let's put some ice. Let's chill this. Let's chill this drink a little bit, and it may be a little bit more refreshing. So I don't know. That's not a an official historian's answer. That's
No,
my opinion.
that historical hunch kind of validated some of the things I thought about. I wondered if the Northerners went to coffee after the Boston Tea Party. That's what I thought. Maybe something with
Yeah,
Thomas Jefferson and the French, leaning into the French, I think something like that. So
yeah. It could be, and but yeah, even like even during the Revolution, living in Camden, Camden's the oldest inland city in the state, and so kind of you get into a lot of Revolutionary War history. I mean, there was there were in the Southern colonies, you still had some loyalists,
yeah,
that were not quick to jump on. They were not always quick to jump on that. I mean, now eventually they
yeah,
did, and of course, if you've seen The Patriot, the movie, that's all about a guy named the life of Thomas Sumter, the swamp fox,
yeah,
or I'm sorry, Francis Marion, excuse me, Thomas Sumter's another guy. That's all Francis Marion, the swamp fox, and the
yeah,
Battle of Camden. Is that if you
yeah,
watch that movie, that's what they're portraying there.
yeah, yeah. And then in the upstate, we have Cowpens. That was a pretty
Mhm.
important battle. But yeah, that's something that was fascinating to me. My wife loves local history, and she was excited to check out Civil War history here. But we were impressed with you get a lot of Revolutionary War history here as
Hmm.
well. So fascinating.
Yeah. Well, you're coming up on the Sester Centennial,
Yeah,
Centennial that's coming
yeah,
up the 250th, and yeah, the state's really made a concerted effort to make sure the southern story is told.
yeah,
Um, Coming out of the Civil War, the winner writes the history books, and so we grew up with Lexington, Concord, all of that, but the majority of the battles of the Revolution was fought here in the South, and so they're trying to retell that story and make sure we don't forget, where the
hmm
where the battle was won, so to speak.
South Carolina. You mentioned it there, but they celebrate their independence. Was it like 5 days earlier? Or what's the history of that? Because I find that fascinating. They shoot off fireworks what on the June
Yeah,
29th or something like that, or what's the
June 29th is Carolina Day, which commemorates Fort Moultrie and kind of the first first shots that were fired down there, or kind of the first like line of defense, like, no, you're not, you're not taking, the Brits are not going to take this fort, kind of a thing. And so prior to what we celebrate on July 4th, that's, there's, prior to that um was this protection of Fort Moultrie, which is a fort down in Charleston. And so that was kind of leading up to, the Revolutionary War, and leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Um, so things like that, and then there a lot of communities in South Carolina prior to 1776 had written what you would call their resolves, and so like the Camden resolves were written prior to the Declaration of Independence, and so the language was very similar. And what it was like, hey, as a community, as this little district of this area, we're we are rejecting the crown, and so you had those type of small little writings and resolves prior to, Jefferson's, you know, grand document that we know as the Declaration of Independence.
yeah, yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
So
so those are the local things.
as a South Carolina native, and a bit of a foodie, I would call you. I'd say maybe you're a bit of a foodie, but what's something that you have to have here? And then what's something that maybe you would say you can only get here, or something that's just authentically unique? Maybe that's the same
Mm,
thing. It might be the same thing, but
yeah.
boiled peanuts or something like that. Maybe you don't get that other places. I don't know.
So as far as a snack, yes, boiled peanuts. Now, Georgia's going to try to tell you that they grow all the peanuts, they know about it, but I'm here to tell you, you haven't had peanuts until you've had South Carolina boiled peanut, which is the official snack of South Carolina, by the way. Um, as far as like produce, peaches, again, Georgia says that they're the peach state. I mean, they can put on their sign if they want to, but the numbers show South Carolina grows more peaches than Georgia. I said what I said, right? So
It is
um
officially noted on the podcast at
yeah.
11:28 Eastern Standard Time.
Um as far as a dish, shrimp and grits, those are things that, people would never think about, like, oh, grits. Anybody who's in the northern part of the country listening to this, or maybe out Midwest, are like, grits. And don't judge grits until you've been in South Carolina and you've had grits with pimento cheese in them, or grits with addaloo sausage as well as shrimp in them. And then once you've had that, then you can judge whether or not you like or dislike grits. There's that. Um, Barbecue is a big thing. So now this is another, especially because our denomination is headquartered in Kansas,
Kansas City. Yeah. Yeah.
Lenexa.
Yeah. Yeah.
South Carolina is first in barbecue. Read the history books. Read the history books. The Native Americans, going back to the late 1600s, 1700s, were doing barbecue before anyone else was doing barbecue. And in South Carolina, barbecue is pork, right? It's not beef. And so in South Carolina, you can only get pulled pork barbecue in a with its partner, hash and rice. So like other states have barbecue, have pulled pork barbecue, but only South Carolina really is true to that. What that it's called, hash and rice, and
Hash and rice.
hash is essentially the barbecue meat's been ground up, and
Okay.
add in some potatoes, brown that all up, and then you sauce it, and it kind of becomes like it's like a porridge, or like a stew type of consistency. Um, we're not going to talk about historically what hash would be, because nobody wants to get into all that. But that's that's what it is. And so
That's
that's
the
that,
so they're prior to North Carolina on barbecue. That's their first. South Carolina.
yeah. Well, and I guess if you're going back to the 1600s, then you're kind of going back to where the Carolinas were the Carolinas.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, again, I'm not going to make any friends on this podcast, but South Carolina, we know where the real Carolina is, right? I'm kidding. I'm just being
That's
funny.
good. So, what would be a hidden gem or your favorite landmark in the state of South Carolina where it's like, if you travel here, make sure you see this? You probably have several, but you can list several if you'd like, but maybe one pops to your mind.
Hmm, the hidden gem. I think, well, just most recently, I've discovered in the upstate, when you think about South Carolina, you think about coast and beaches, which, rightfully so. You think about Myrtle Beach. In fact, I joked with our district superintendent. I was like, it's easy to get pastors here. Just go to some Midwestern part of some districts and say, hey, don't you want to come to Myrtle Beach? And all the Midwesterners will be like, yes, let me come. Um, and but people don't realize the beauty of the mountains in the upstate, the waterfalls, the landscape, the hikes, the trails that are here. So that certainly comes to mind. Historical landmark. This is very obscure. If you want to see uh, the only town in which a president of the United States was a prisoner of war, that's in Camden. And so now he wasn't currently the president, but Andrew Jackson, when he was 10 years old, 10 or 11, was a POW in Camden by the British. And if you see a picture of Andrew Jackson, he has a scar here. That's from a saber of a British saber, because they told him to shine my shoes, kid, and he refused to shine a British soldier's shoes, and then they sliced him. So that's, if you see a picture and you see a scar, that's where that's from. There's that. Hilton Head, Harbor Town. It's just it's a beautiful state, and wherever you go, there's something to enjoy,
Yeah.
and something to
Yeah.
experience.
So something I always have to ask my guests. You've already talked about food, but what's your favorite meal?
Yeah, my favorite meal is barbecue, and particularly you have to go to Orangeburg, South Carolina, and the family name is Dukes, which goes back to a guy who developed a particular recipe for a sauce that is very popular. And this is kind of going towards the low country. Um, and so that's my favorite meal. It's going down that part of the state and getting barbecue, hash and rice, fried chicken. Those that's a very for me that's a very authentic. Now don't get me wrong, when I go to Kansas City to visit my brother, like I don't turn down brisket. It's
Yeah.
it's amazing. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's not good. It's awesome. I love going there too.
Yeah. The sauce is a bit different too. I've been told. I haven't had authentic South Carolina barbecue yet. I need to, but
Yeah.
the sauce is a bit different. Is that right? More of a mustard
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because different parts of the state are different. So in the Midlands, so when you get down to Columbia, it is heavy. It's heavy mustard. So kind of mustard with like a little bit of a kick. Now in Orangeburg, that recipe has mustard in it, but it has other things. It has mayonnaise and ketchup and some other spices to kind of give it more of an orange sweet tang,
Ah,
if you will.
yeah,
So it doesn't have quite like the bite or of like a pure mustard based sauce. And then when you get into what's called our PD area, so Florence, South Carolina that's where you'll find a lot of vinegar based barbecue, which is an influence from North Carolina because
ah, got it.
Eastern North Carolina is heavy vinegar, which is
Yeah,
good too. I like that as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what about dessert? Where's your favorite dessert found, or what is your
Uh,
favorite dessert?
so if we're getting dessert, in fact, I invite anybody. If you want to come visit Greenville, South Carolina, come. I will take you to lunch. I will show you Greenville, and you can attest to that because
Yes, yes.
we went downtown. Um, Brick Street Cafe in Greenville, South Carolina, and we're going to have sweet potato cake.
Ah,
Yeah,
sweet potato cake. I've never had that.
sweet
I'll have to
potato
go check
cake.
that out.
Yeah. So it for people who are like need context, think carrot cake without the spice, but it's kind of similar in color, and it still has a cream cheese icing, but it's the base is sweet potatoes versus obviously carrots and some of the
Yeah,
spice. Yeah,
yeah. I'll have to try that out.
yeah, real good.
Well, Reverend Snodgrass, I've kept you long. I apologize, but what's a good word you can leave us on? What can our listeners be praying for you about at Hope Point? And maybe what are you praying about, or what are you hoping to see at Hope Point? What's your hope for
Um,
Hope Point?
my my hope is we continue to stay true to the gospel of Christ. The gospel changes lives. The story of God changes lives. We're simply called to be the narrators of of God's redemptive activity in the world, and so that's always my prayer. And obviously, you get into details of like what that looks like, but my prayer, like Lord, help us to be these narrators of your story, and wherever that leads us, like whatever that looks like as far as how we do that, may we be responsive and may we be faithful to that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this time, and thank you for being a welcoming, hospitable ambassador of the kingdom of Christ in the upstate. I really appreciate that.
Amen. It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.